So season 2 picks up a year after the finale.
Mm-hmm.
So when we see Emma again, does she know Joe is alive, and like how will she react when she finds this out?
Well, I obviously can't spoil that and can't say thank you, but I can say that in the finale, and hopefully it played, she truly believed he was dead, and she's lived under that weight and that for a year, and obviously James Purefoy is here, so we don't know whether or not he's alive, and neither does she, but there's sort of two avenues that it could go. If he is dead, then it's an examination of who Emma is without him, whether she does rise, be the big baddie, or whether she even cares about the cult. And if he is alive, how does she feel about that? How would she feel about having lived without him for a year? How does she want him anymore? Is she angry? So I think just beautiful sort of openness to how things can go with Emma in season 2, which is exciting, and seeing how that unfolds depending on certain circumstances.
So based off kind of your answer, is she going to end up being more unhinged now that, because she was kind of...
What are you talking about? Emma's very tightly hinged.
She was so... Well, I feel like she had her up and down moments. There were some moments where you were like, oh, she has a heart, she's in there. And then there's other moments where she was just dead on,
She had a heart, I think.
To do her mission.
And everything is about the mission, because everything is about her love and devotion for Joe. Her whole life is about Joe. I think it's very easy to look at her and see a selfish character, and she's actually incredibly selfless. Her life exists for Joe Carrol. I think what we'll see that we saw hints of throughout season 1 is that when you say unhinged, I mean that vulnerability, the cracks in her exterior, in her resolve, in her certainty about where things are going. Everything is questioned. Everything comes into question in season 2 after losing Joe, after being on her own. So she's in a much more vulnerable, tenuous position that way. If that answers your question.
No, it does. It does.
So we saw the very twisted romance in season 1 that Emma was...
Which one?
All of it. What are we going to see for Emma? Is there any guy in her life?
There's only ever one guy in her life,
But with
really.
Joe possibly dead.
Is there any guy in her life? I mean, there's still only Joe. even if he's dead, I mean, her life. Well, that's the question: is whether or not she can move on. And I don't know. I don't know if Emma is capable of existing without him or without living for him. We're all waiting to find out.
Now that you're into the second season, do you find that the writers are writing more towards your strengths as opposed to you coming in and kind of filling in what they had written when you started out?
I think Kevin Williamson had the story mapped out pretty far from the beginning. I don't know as an actress playing toward my strength. I have to drive a car, and I'm terrible about driving on camera. I start going at 10 miles an hour. They're like, peel out. I'm like, I can't. That's one of my big weaknesses on camera. But I don't know. I think the reason that I'm playing the role is because, for whatever reason, this character is one that plays to my strength. So as long as Kevin Williamson is still writing her as truthfully and and interestingly as he does, it'll continue to be something that I hopefully bring my strengths to the table.
What's going to be the fallout in season 2? Because, your character's face was... your character's...
I do it all the time.
Doing it all the time. Your character's face was all over the place as someone that is wanted.
Yeah.
So now, what do? So he's gone, in your mind. He might never come back. You're completely lost. How is she handling that? What is she going through?
Emma has had to survive by the skin of her teeth, and she is kind of, the most wanted person with the most visible face, and, she's got a pretty recognizable look also. And so she's had to find ways to hide in plain sight, to blend in with the crowd, and she's always been very good at getting the job done and doing what she needs to do. But it has not been the most exciting, satisfying life when you're basically just surviving, which is kind of what she's been doing.
With Joe, he based all his killings around literature and all, Poe and stuff. Now that Joe's gone, does Emma in her killing, does she have something she bases it around off, or does she just copycat the literature as well?
Well, here's the thing, you know, and Kevin Williamson may not like this answer. It's my answer. Is you know, Emma's very bookish and very literary, and obviously Joe used that to manipulate her as well. But everything she did was about Joe. You know, the whole cult, the whole like religion of Poe and everything was kind of like, okay, honey, that's cute. You know, like if you like it, sure. But it was really about Joe. And she's not a bloodthirsty person, so she doesn't, you know, her kills weren't about a message. They weren't about an idea the way his are, you know, sort of murder as art. Hers were just what she needed to do for him. So she would just as happily and easily vacuum the rugs for him as kill somebody, and with about as much empathy, or about as much feeling. So I guess that answers the question. She wasn't really, it wasn't about the religion of Poe for her, it was about the religion of Joe. So.
All right, how do you feel about, with Joe out of the picture more, Emma coming to the forefront? Do you feel like you're kind of been promoted in the show a bit? You're up the hierarchy a bit more.
Is like Emma up the hierarchy of evil? You know, Emma always thought she was very high up the hierarchy. You know, the idea of Roderick was pretty shocking to her. But what you're going to see also is whether or not she does even believe in the idea of the hierarchy of the cult, and you know, is she going to reassemble that? Is she not? Frankly, in season 1, they were just a bunch of interlopers hanging out, trying to like take up time with her man. You know, and she kind of always existed as a lone wolf, even in the mansion. So you're going to see whether or not she wants to take on a position of power and get some minions of her own, or if she's going to do her own thing and survive that way.
So how much?
I'm so sorry. No, go ahead.
No. So how much do your friends bug you for spoilers, and how hard is it to keep it from them?
My friends don't want spoilers at all, because my friends, for the most part, watch the show and really enjoy it, and that's the worst thing, is if I spoil anything, they get really mad. So it's hard to be doing exciting things at work, and you know, it's what I do from day to day. You guys can talk about your jobs. I'm like, I can't talk about my job, because I'll ruin a show that you love that's not going to be on for 6 months.
How far in advance do you find out what's going on?
Like, that week. I mean, it just like, you know, we were very honest on the panel. We said that you kind of get a week's notice if you're going to die. It's true. We get one script, and the script is always a surprise. You know, sometimes I know broad strokes about where theoretically the story is going, but then those things change all the time. So you try not to get attached to it as an actor. You know, somebody will put something in your ear and you're like, just got to move on. But scripts, you know, come pretty quickly before we start shooting, and it's all about, you know, being on your feet, being on your toes as an actor, and it's about knowing the character well enough to know how they would act in any situation, because you don't have a ton of time to sit there and analyze it, which is great. It's really free. You know, you don't get in your head as an actor, but it's always a surprise.
I was going to kind of ask something sort of similar, because a lot of the actors around you, like you know, your little group when it first started, all got killed one way or another. So, you know, do you ever get worried that script's going to come? You know,
well, of course, I breathe a sigh of relief at the end of every script where I don't end up dead. You know, there was the moment in episode, I think 11, when Jacob hallucinated Emma in the bathtub eviscerated, and I was like, I'm like, I never got a phone call. I never got a warning. Where was my warning walk? You know, with the hand on the shoulder. But I know what show I'm on. I know that I could go at any moment. And that's part of what makes the story great, and that's what makes the fans invested in it, is the stakes being that high. And all I hope is that if and when I do go out, that I get a really good death. You know, Agent Parker had a fantastic death. I think Jacob had a really great death. Most of the characters that we've been invested in have had pretty dramatic deaths. Poor Jacob. I know.
That was but I agree, it was very surprising. I didn't think that was coming.
It was a surprise, you know, it was a surprise to everyone, and so was Roderick's death, and so was every death. But we all knew what show we signed on for, and that's what Kevin Williamson does best, is he surprises you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Have fun.
Can you pass me my